I'm Joseph L. Flatley, and from Amphibian Media, this is A Paranoid's History of the United States. Each week, I explore America's obsession with conspiracy theories, bringing untold stories to light, and challenging what we think we know about our nation's history.
4, 3, 2, 1,
A cloud hides the sky. A nuclear shadow falls across the human future. Midway through the 20th century, two superpowers prepared for a conflict which might have ended life on the planet.
The Cold War stretched for most of the second half of the 20th century, affecting the history of the world as the United States and the Soviet Union battled for supremacy and world power. The two countries fought over economic systems, international influence, and even outer space.
Welcome to today's episode, where we'll examine the role of culture in the Cold War. This was one of the conflict's most fascinating and least understood battlegrounds. While most historical accounts focus on military tensions, proxy wars, and nuclear brinkmanship, there was another crucial theater where the United States and the Soviet Union competed fiercely, the realm of ideas, art, and intellectual discourse.
At the close of the Second World War, the United States, the one outright victor, had suddenly found itself a superpower. Needing a culture to match, it stared over the wire at Russia, which had pursued intellectual politics ever since Catherine the Great, and set about acquiring worldwide intellectual admiration and support. As the Cold War froze and ideologies divided, the US government, through its intelligence and espionage arm, poured huge resources into a cultural propaganda campaign. A central feature of this campaign was to advance the claim that it didn't exist. The CIA was, in effect, acting as America's hidden Ministry of Culture.
That was Frances Stonor Saunders, speaking on an old episode of C-SPAN's Book TV. She is the author of The Cultural Cold War, The CIA and the World of Arts and Letters. What Saunders reveals is striking. The CIA operated as a hidden ministry of culture throughout much of the Cold War era. While the Soviet Union openly controlled cultural programs, America worked behind the scenes, knowing direct government involvement in cultural promotion would face domestic resistance and political backlash. This cultural operation served a clear purpose: winning the ideological struggle against communism. By the late 1940s, American strategists recognized that cultural achievements were vital companions to political influence. As one CIA agent explained, they aimed to, quote, inoculate the world against the contagion of communism by showcasing Western democracy's superiority through intellectual and artistic freedom, not just material prosperity. Frances Stonor Saunders again.
CIA agent Donald Jameson intended no irony when he told me that, as far as the attitudes that the agency wanted to inspire through these activities are concerned, clearly what they would like to have been able to produce were people who, of their own reasoning and conviction, were persuaded that everything the United States government did was right. It's not a question, then, of people being coerced into saying what they didn't believe. It's not a question of people writing articles for Encounter magazine or Tempo Presente or Quadrant or even American journals here like Partisan Review, which very indirectly received CIA funding at one point to boost its circulation. It's not a question of them simply acting as simple ventriloquists for the American government. On the contrary, it's what you might describe as the inevitable relations between employer and employee, in which the wishes of the former become implicit in the acts of the latter. National Committee for a Free Europe, Crusade for Freedom, Free Asia Committee, Free Europe University, Radio Free this, Radio Free that, Congress for Cultural Freedom. In the mid-1960s, the joke was that if any American philanthropic or cultural organization carried the words free or private in its literature, it must be a CIA front.
The scale of this cultural operation was immense. The CIA influenced over 20 prestigious literary magazines across multiple continents and played a role in publishing more than 1,000 books. The agency organized high-profile intellectual conferences and funded international art tours. At its peak, this cultural network operated in 35 countries, concentrating efforts on post-war Europe where minds seemed most vulnerable to Soviet ideas. What makes this story fascinating isn't just its scope, but its central contradiction. The CIA secretly promoted freedom and individualism through deception. This fundamental tension between goals and methods would ultimately contribute to the operation's collapse. Today, we'll examine one case study that illustrates this larger phenomenon. The Congress for Cultural Freedom, a CIA-created organization that became the centerpiece of America's cultural Cold War. We'll explain how this seemingly independent alliance of intellectuals served as a vehicle for American influence, how it was funded, and the complex questions it raises about autonomy, integrity, and the relationship between government power and cultural expression.
Our Freedom Bell comes to Berlin. To mark the new spirit which has risen from the city's ruins, this bell, weighing 10 tons and cast in Britain, is placed in position in the town hall of Schöneberg. The bell will remain an inspiration to peace-loving countries and serve as a note of warning to all would-be oppressors.
The Congress for Cultural Freedom was established in Berlin in the summer of 1950, a symbolic location given the city's position on the front line of Cold War divisions. This timing coincided with increased tension, including the outbreak of the Korean War and the consolidation of Soviet power in Eastern Europe. The CCF appeared to be a spontaneous alliance of intellectuals defending culture against totalitarianism. The organization presented itself as independent, a coalition of thinkers united by democratic values and opposition to communist ideology. Its founding Berlin conference gathered intellectuals from across Europe and America, including Arthur Koestler, Sidney Hook, and Melvin Lasky. They produced a manifesto that championed freedom of thought as essential for cultural progress. However, Saunders' research revealed the CCF's origins weren't spontaneous at all. Though publicly portrayed as independent, it was actually conceived, established, and largely directed by the CIA. The agency viewed the organization as crucial for demonstrating, quote, the fallibility of the Soviet mythos, and promoting Western democracy's superiority as a framework for cultural and philosophical inquiry.
At its peak, the Congress for Cultural Freedom had offices in 35 countries, employed hundreds of personnel, published over 20 prestige magazines, owned a news and features service, organized high-profile international conferences, and rewarded musicians and artists with prizes and public performances. Amongst these were the Boston Symphony Orchestra, Abstract Expressionism, the Mozarteum Akademie Orchester of Salzburg, Tanglewood Music School, International Pen, the Philharmonica Ungarica, the film versions of Animal Farm in 1984, Metropolitan Opera, Berlin Cultural Festival, and many, many other organizations and events were indirectly, and whether they knew it or not, and whether they liked it or not, linked to the Congress for Cultural Freedom or indeed other fronts run by the CIA. This prolific activity made the Congress for Cultural Freedom a compelling feature of Western cultural life.
From Berlin, the Congress for Cultural Freedom established a global network. At its peak, it had offices in 35 countries considered susceptible to Soviet ideas. Its most powerful tool was its publishing arm. Over 20 respected magazines, including the London-based Encounter, which attracted elite contributors while subtly advancing American interests. Behind this intellectual facade lay an intricate financial web designed to hide CIA involvement. Money flowed through philanthropic front groups. For instance, the Hoblitz Foundation claimed to support disabled Texans while actually funding an Italian magazine. Meanwhile, the Miami District Fund supported German publications. This complex system maintained plausible deniability about funding sources until it began collapsing in the mid-1960s.
If you visit a museum with a collection of modern and contemporary art, you're likely to see works that sometimes elicit the response, "My cat could make that, so how is it art?" A movement called abstract expressionism, also known as the New York School, gets this reaction particularly often. It's characterized by large, primarily abstract paintings, all over compositions without clear focal points, and sweeping swaths of paint embodying and eliciting emotions.
One of the most remarkable aspects of the CIA's cultural Cold War was its promotion of abstract expressionism, a movement that perfectly illustrates the paradoxical nature of the agency's cultural strategy. Here was an art form that, in the domestic United States, was widely derided and politically toxic. Congressional representatives mockingly denounced abstract paintings to ridicule modern art, and prominent media figures initially dismissed the movement as incomprehensible and un-American. Yet simultaneously, the CIA was secretly working to promote this same art form internationally as a symbol of American creative freedom and cultural vitality.
Old lefties getting into bed with the CIA does seem to be one of the more curious legacies of the Cold War. What did the CIA have in common with the likes of Jackson Pollock? I don't look at Jackson Pollock and see in those random splurgy lines a metaphor for the great rugged individualism of the United States of America. That's not what I see, but that's what the CIA wanted me to see.
This paradox reveals the sophisticated understanding the CIA had developed about cultural symbolism in the Cold War context. The agency recognized what many politicians and ordinary Americans did not. Abstract expressionism, with its emphasis on individualism, freedom, and nonconformity, could serve as a powerful counterpoint to Soviet socialist realism, with its rigid adherence to party-approved themes and styles.
Bizarrely, what's happening is that the CIA identify an American, an absolutely quintessentially American movement in aesthetics, which is being derided at home in America. And they decide, as a result of that, to protect it, to nurture it, to promote it, and to export it abroad as a carrier for a positive idea about America and American freedom.
The CIA's promotion of abstract expressionism exemplifies their Cold War cultural strategy. This art movement, derided by many Americans at home, became a powerful symbol of American creative freedom abroad, deliberately contrasting with Soviet socialist realism. Individualism, nonconformity, and resistance to interpretation, the very qualities that made it controversial, also made it a suitable cultural weapon globally. When we come back, we'll examine how the CIA became Jackson Pollock's unlikely benefactor and reveal the critical role the Museum of Modern Art played in legitimizing abstract expressionism as part of this covert campaign.
I'm Matt Stroud, founder and CEO of Amphibian Media, and an investigative journalist who's spent 2 decades working to tell hard stories the right way. Most of the media industry runs one way. Storytellers give, and corporations take. We're doing things differently. At Amphibian, we work with the people inside the story, journalists, whistleblowers, survivors, and we help them tell it their way with dignity, precision, and power. That's why we're proud to present this show. A Paranoid's History of the United States is hosted by longtime investigative reporter and author Joseph L. Flatley. Each week, he investigates the strange, often hidden realities behind official American history. Want to know more or have a story to tell? Head to www.amphibian.media. Let's make something that matters.
In 1947, Jackson Pollock started dripping, flinging, scattering, and pouring paint onto canvases spread across the floor. Some thought it was lunacy, but the most influential voices thought it genius. That's the legacy that has prevailed. That's why you've heard of him and see his work in museums. That's why a single one of his paintings can sell for $50 million. But when you find yourself in front of one of his paintings now, what do you do with it? How do you look at this and derive some sort of something from it? Why does it matter? And what does it mean now?
Jackson Pollock, with his unconventional techniques and distinctive action painting style, became the movement's most iconic figure. Despite, or because of, his personal struggles with alcoholism and his unorthodox methods, Pollock emerged as a symbol of the unfettered creative expression possible in a democratic society. The contrast with the Soviet Union, where composers like Shostakovich faced public censure for work deemed insufficiently optimistic or aligned with state objectives, could not have been starker.
Pollock, by the way, is the hero who impersonates the nation. He comes in, like some kind of screen cowboy through the bar doors at the Cedar Tavern and says, you know, I can paint better than anyone. And they get this perfect character, self-directed, individualistic, almost anti-establishment character. And that's what they're saying to the rest of the world.
Here, Francis Stonor Saunders is speaking to a journalist from the Telesur news network.
This idea that this man who's struggling with alcohol and chucking cans of paint round in a studio that's falling apart somewhere in the Hamptons, the idea that he becomes the cherished vessel of American freedom, of the official, if secret, idea of American liberal freedom is so fantastic you wouldn't credit it. You know, you just wouldn't think it's possible. But that's what happens, and that's why the CIA thinking is very sophisticated.
Earlier attempts by the State Department to showcase American modern art abroad had ended in political disaster. A touring exhibition organized in the late 1940s faced such intense criticism that it was canceled, with paintings literally being recalled while en route to European galleries. The backlash confirmed the political impossibility of openly promoting abstract art through official government channels. This is where the CIA's covert approach proved invaluable. The agency recognized that abstract expressionism directly countered socialist realism, making Soviet art appear more rigid and confined by comparison, a useful contrast for Cold War propaganda. However, the CIA understood that promoting this controversial art form openly would have been politically disastrous, so they deliberately kept their support hidden from public view. Working behind the scenes was essential to their strategy's success.
So there's quite a few people working at the CIA, including the man who's heading up this international organizations division, it's called, a guy called Tom Braden, who's impeccably connected. He's worked for intelligence in the Second World War. He's an academic. He works for Nelson Rockefeller at the Museum of Modern Art after the Second World War, and then is recruited to the CIA. He is the kind of, I would say, kingpin. So essentially it's the CIA, Tom Braden and his division, the Museum of Modern Art, particularly its international program, the Congress for Cultural Freedom, which has access to the major galleries of every major capital in Western Europe. Some people have said to me when I've been talking about this, to say it's interesting that the CIA make better art critics than most of the art critics at the time, because in a sense they see this coming and they back it before anyone else does.
The implementation of the strategy involved close collaboration between the CIA, the Congress for Cultural Freedom, and the Museum of Modern Art. MOMA, with its impeccable cultural credentials and international connections, became an essential partner in legitimizing and promoting abstract expressionism. The museum's international program, headed by individuals with connections to American intelligence circles, organized exhibitions that traveled throughout Europe and beyond. But abstract expressionism needed more than an exhibition space. It required critical recognition and media amplification. The agency targeted influential opinion makers like Henry Luce, founder of Life magazine, who had initially dismissed the movement. According to Saunders' research, MOMA officials and CIA associates persuaded Luce to change his stance, resulting in media coverage including a feature on Jackson Pollock that elevated his profile and that of his peers.
Firing line with William F. Buckley, Jr.
Robert Scheer has emerged since the liquidation of founder-publisher Edward Keating as the principal figure in Ramparts magazine, well known principally for blowing the CIA, though known even before that to students of anti-American and radical agitation.
The unraveling of the CIA's elaborate cultural funding network began in 1966, when Ramparts magazine began reporting on the CIA funding of the National Student Association. As the investigation expanded, reporters traced financial discrepancies in tax returns of various foundation fronts, revealing patterns that suggested coordinated funding from a central source. This investigative work gradually uncovered the broader network of CIA cultural operations, including the promotion of abstract expressionism. When confronted with these revelations, the CIA attempted damage control by launching a smear campaign, attempting to portray the magazine as influenced by communist sources. However, these efforts failed as more evidence emerged confirming the extent of the CIA's cultural operations. By the late 1960s, what had been one of America's most closely guarded Cold War programs became public knowledge. The system that had successfully operated for nearly 20 years was finally exposed, forcing the CIA to reconsider its approach to cultural influence.
Was there any real justification for assuming that the principles of Western democracy couldn't be revived in post-war Europe according to some internal mechanism? Or for not assuming that democracy could be more complex than was implied by the lauding of American liberalism? To what degree was it admissible for another state to covertly intervene in the fundamental processes of organic intellectual growth, of free debate and the uninhibited flow of ideas in the countries of its allies? Did this not risk producing, instead of freedom, a kind of ur-freedom, where people think they're acting freely, when in fact they are bound to forces over which they have no control?
These revelations damaged the credibility of the CIA-backed cultural movements. Learning that abstract expressionism was secretly promoted as a Cold War tool raised questions about artistic merit and authenticity. Did the art succeed through quality or political utility? This revelation contradicted the CIA's narrative that American culture embodied freedom, unlike Soviet restrictions. The irony was clear. While championing artistic liberty against Soviet control, the agency engaged in its own subtle manipulation. This moment marked a turning point in Cold War politics, forcing the CIA to rethink its methods. The episode raised ethical questions about government involvement in cultural production that still echo in today's discussions of arts policy and funding.
40 years ago, in the wake of Watergate, the United States Senate created a special committee to look into the activities of U.S. intelligence services. The committee had a long official title. It was the Senate Select Committee to Study Governmental Operations with Respect to Intelligence Activities. And it quickly took on the nickname of its chairman, Frank Church, and it was best known to history as the Church Committee.
The Church Committee report of 1976 further exposed CIA cultural funding activities, leading Congress to block the agency from recruiting journalists or running propaganda at home. But this didn't end government influence on the arts and culture. President Reagan created the National Endowment for Democracy, while the CIA set up an Office of Public Affairs to shape media coverage. Government influence continues today through subtler channels, including Hollywood relationships that are harder to trace than earlier CIA methods. As newspapers and traditional media outlets struggled financially, a new ecosystem emerged. Foundations, nonprofits, and state-affiliated organizations stepped into the funding void. The mechanisms of influence have grown more nuanced. Money steers journalists toward certain topics while neglecting others. Strategic hiring ensures key positions go to those who share broader institutional viewpoints. And gradually, media outlets immersed in these funding relationships adopt the norms and priorities of their benefactors, not through coercion, but through professional adaptation. These techniques of cultural manipulation echo what we saw in our previous episode on the Benowitz affair, where Air Force intelligence operatives didn't simply silence Paul Benowitz when he spotted something near Kirtland Air Force Base. They orchestrated an elaborate deception that ultimately drove him to mental collapse. They created an entire mythology about underground alien bases and government conspiracies that persists to this day.
Who calls the CIA and goes, we just like to come in and hang out with you guys?
Yeah, so Henry Bromell, who was one of our founding fathers of Homeland, one of our writers, passed away a number of years ago, but his dad was in the CIA, and his cousin was a mentee of his father's and was also in the CIA, a very accomplished person there. And he recently retired, but in his retirement, he curates this week-long spy camp for us producers and writers. And
really?
Yeah.
Is it like, you
know? Yeah,
know...
so we park ourselves in a club in Georgetown and talk to, like, real spooks. And, you know, people in the intelligence community and the State Department and journalists.
The CIA's manipulation extends boldly into Hollywood, where it established an entertainment industry liaison position in 1996 to shape its public image through film and television. Major productions like Homeland and Zero Dark 30 have received CIA assistance, including script consultation and access to film at CIA headquarters, in exchange for portraying the agency favorably. The relationship benefits both sides. Filmmakers get authentic details and locations, while the CIA gets a polished public image. Documents obtained through Freedom of Information Act requests reveal the staggering scope of intelligence agency influence in entertainment. Dozens of films and television shows have received support from the CIA, creating a system where intelligence agencies use multiple means to manipulate content and even block production of films that might portray them critically. The pattern is clear. Whether it's the CIA promoting abstract expressionism as a weapon in the cultural Cold War, the Air Force fabricating UFO mythology to distract from classified projects, or today's government agencies shaping film and TV, these agencies don't just protect secrets. They actively create and shape our cultural mythology. The world we inhabit isn't simply one where information is occasionally hidden from us. It's one where entire cultural narratives are systematically manufactured to serve strategic objectives. The cultural landscape we navigate daily has been invisibly sculpted by operations most of us will never know existed.
Louder!
This is Jeffrey Steinberg, who you might remember from our episode on the octopus. He's a prominent member of the Lyndon LaRouche political cult that plays prominently in the Danny Casolaro story. In this clip, Steinberg blows the lid off the Congress of Cultural Freedom.
That is a brief but typically painful passage from Igor Stravinsky's Rite of Spring. This piece of music was, for all intents and purposes, the theme song or national anthem of the Congress for Cultural Freedom. In 1952, the centerpiece of a month-long cultural festival in Paris, France. We'll, over the course of this panel discussion, find out probably a good deal more about Stravinsky and come to understand why Theodor Adorno of the Frankfurt School boasted that Stravinsky's music induces various forms of psychosis, including ultimately necrophilia.
When the mainstream media fails to thoroughly investigate and report on intelligence agencies' covert influence, it creates an information vacuum. A vacuum that is filled by alternative voices, often from the fringes of political discourse. While the CIA's involvement in cultural promotion during the Cold War is documented historical fact, the lack of comprehensive mainstream coverage has left space for more extreme interpretations. Jeffrey Steinberg and the LaRouche organization represent this phenomenon. They take legitimate concerns about CIA cultural manipulation, but then extend them into wild, unfounded conspiracy theories about the Queen of England dealing dope and Soviet composers causing psychological disorders. The result is a polarized media landscape where verified facts about the intelligence agency's cultural operations get mixed with outlandish claims, making it easier for the general public to dismiss the entire subject. When mainstream sources abdicate their responsibility to cover these stories with appropriate context and evidence, the myths prevail, which serves neither truth nor public understanding. Join me next time as we uncover another hidden chapter in American history. This is A Paranoid's History of the United States. I'm Joseph L. Flatley. A Paranoid's History of the United States is written and read by me, Joseph L. Flatley. Recorded and produced by Jesse Noss at Red Cayman Studios in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Music by Benjamin Nicholson. Paranoid's History is an Amphibian Media production. For more info, check out the show notes or go to paranoidhistory.com.